Welcome to the Straight Cutting Experience, where we get exclusive stories from growers from across Western Canada about straight cutting canola. A lot of you out there are thinking, I want to try straight combining canola, but how do I make sure that I have success and I minimize the mistakes that others have made? Well, you've got questions and we've got answers. We're talking to farmers to get you those answers. Some farmers with experience, farmers that have been straight combining canola in the past. Today's guest is Chris Zemlak. He's a farmer from Elfrost, Saskatchewan. He joins us right now. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us here on the podcast. So, straight cutting canola, I guess, introduce the audience to how long have you been straight cutting canola?
This year will be about the 5th year that we've tried it on the farm.
Okay. And I guess what made you make that first step towards straight cutting? And give us a bit of a context in terms of what percentage of your acres are you straight cutting?
Well, it went from trying that one field just to see what the hype was about years ago and see if it would work on our farm. Mixed results, we'll put it that way. And we've tried a bit the last few years. This year, we're probably going to be doing over half. And honestly, if I had it my way, it'd probably be the entire farm.
Why do you like it so much?
It works fantastic because from a capital investment, I don't have to buy another swather. We've got an old one. It does the trick for what we need it to, but we've also got a sprayer, and it's a lot handier to desiccate and get the field ready for harvest at 100 feet, and I call it 12 miles an hour.
So you're obviously straight cutting your other crops as well then?
Yes, we are. Trying to eliminate the swather in our operation as much as possible so then we can purchase other assets or new equipment as we're upgrading and increasing acres.
Now, as I've talked to a lot of different growers across Western Canada about this topic, some of the farmers that are not straight cutting canola, the response I get back on the reason why a lot of times is straight cutting canola is different. Canola is different. You need to swath it. It's different. It's not like straight cutting barley or wheat. It's different. Obviously, you don't necessarily think that way. Why is it really the same?
It all comes down to management practices and growing that best crop, because if you can get a nice uniform crop, irregardless of what it is, it just handles fantastic through a combine. There's something fun about straight cutting canola with a 40-foot header at 5 mile an hour and putting 40, 50 bushel an acre in the back of the hopper.
Yeah.
It's just fast, simple, and it works great as a tool on the operation.
Now, this year we've seen a lot of wind across parts of Western Canada, and especially around the Saskatoon area. I was there a couple times the last couple weeks. A lot of people complaining about wind and not being able to spray when they want to. Does wind worry you? Because we see wind can cause massive issues with swath canola, as we see swaths rolling through the field and getting caught in the fence row, which is extremely unfortunate. But do you worry about wind at harvest time?
Not as much as I probably should. It was actually a farmer friend of mine who had, basically told me to look at the swath. Like as you walk into the straight cut canola, ignore the white that you see because it always looks bad on the outside. But once you get into it, you're going to notice there's very little shelling. If you get the nice tight knit mat of canola, the whole field will move, and you don't see that shattering when you get into it with a combine.
Yeah, I've had a number of different growers tell me that until you really start to look at it, they didn't realize how much loss they were having in a swath. So they almost like this idea that, we talk about concern about losing seeds to wind in a standing crop. People didn't realize how much loss there actually was in the swath, and thinking that there's none is actually maybe not as accurate as we might have thought 5-10 years ago.
It's pretty easy when you combine and, you look at it a couple of weeks later and you have that nice green row of canola growing every swath that you have in the field.
Yeah, it's, what are you seeing with the sample? I've heard from different growers that the sample I know I can share with you an experience I had back in 2009. I was in Chile, and I was visiting some seed production facilities, and some of the parent canola seed plots, they were being cut by hand, like a describe it? Like a big, huge knife, right? And people were cutting down the swaths. And it was essentially like manual straight cutting, right? Because then they would hand thresh the parent plot. And I remember looking at the sample and thinking, I couldn't believe how dark and rich the color of the canola was in comparison to our traditional harvest sample that we could see here, which might not necessarily be that way depending on the conditions. What has been your experience? What are you seeing in your samples?
Very much the same thing. It's a night and day difference. You've got the bigger, blacker kernels. A lot of the times, I guess depending on how well the crop is dried down, you'll see a lot cleaner sample as well, or at least in our case.
Yeah. So I guess, when you talk to some of your farming neighbors and, some farmers across Western Canada listening to this podcast, when they say, any recommendations you can give them on just getting started, getting over that initial hump?
I would say the biggest thing to focus on is pick the right genetics up front. Do your best to have the cleanest, most uniform crop as possible. And then if you are going to try it for the first time, pick a field that's tight-knit and intertwined, or one that you would never want to walk through, because that's going to increase your odds of having a good experience. And then when you are driving by, waiting for it to dry down, don't look at the white shelled-out pods on the exterior. It's a very minimal amount of loss there.
It's almost like go to the lake for a week and come back.
Essentially.
Okay, so you mentioned picking the right genetics. What characteristics do you look for in a good straight cut variety?
I want a vigorous plant that will grow well, intertwine, and just become a mat or like a carpet. A perfect world, I would have a slight lodge to it, like fairly upright, but just enough to tilt it on its side so it'll move as one field and not smash into each other, even if there are thinner areas.
So it's almost like this interlocking net effect where the crop sort of sways back and forth in the breeze together, sort of a romantic kind of situation. But it sort of, the plant sort of essentially dances together, right? It moves, and so you don't get if you had branches that were banging against each other, essentially we'd be shelling out the crop. Where if it's netted, it's really just kind of moving all together in a real uniform motion. Is that a good way to describe it?
Exactly. You want it like a well orchestrated dance floor where everyone's moving in sync versus mosh pit.
So yeah, so it's almost like, think of it as a classical music variety as opposed to like a 9 Inch Nails kind of thing. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what about harvest timing? I joked about going to the lake for a week and coming back. What kind of tips can you give us in terms of harvest timing?
Just basically keep an eye on it. Once you do it for a little bit, you'll get that feel on how long it's going to take to mature, and looking at the staging of the crop too when you spray it, that's going to dictate it as well. And weather plays a big factor. It's not like you are swathing it where in X weeks it's probably going to be ready. This can have a little bit of variability.
And it's not like we had swath timing perfected. Like, I know that every year we produce swath timing videos, and they're always very, very popular. People really struggle with swath timing, so maybe this takes some of the stress out of harvest. Desiccating and then just rolling in there with a combine seems a lot simpler.
There is something simple about, spray, come back, and knock it off, and it doesn't matter which way the wind is blowing or which way you want to combine it or who you have as an operator. You just take the standing canola and good to go.
And lastly, how about storage? Do you do anything different storage-wise with a straight-cut canola crop than you would with a swath one, or is it pretty much the same?
We typically treat it very close to the same. We may throw it on air a little longer if there are some green bits of trash in the sample. But aside from that, you just treat it like regular canola.
Well, Chris, thanks a lot for joining us here on the Straight Cutting Experience, and have a good rest to your growing season, okay?
Thanks so much.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Straight Cutting Experience. I want to thank Chris Zemlak from Elfrost, Saskatchewan for being our guest. Make sure you follow BASF on Twitter at BASF Ag Solutions, and also check out other episodes of this straight cutting experience by going to agsolutions.ca/straightcutpod. I'm Shaun Haney with Real Agriculture. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Straight Cutting Experience.